Celtic Badass of the Week showcases a person of Celtic heritage each week. Those who exemplify the give no shit attitude and come out on top. They may come from our past or our present, but rest assured they come from all walks of life and legend. They are men, women, even old ladies and pirate queens. Now you don't have to be a muscled up Celt in a fur kilt swinging a mighty sword. You can just be a 4'11" Welsh woman and suffragette who knows jujitsu. Now most of these badasses are all too real, and while some of these are only legend, they're badass legends. The only prerequisite is Celtic blood and badassedness. This week's Celtic badass, well, it's Somerled. I've been saving this one for just special occasion. The rise of a superb badass. A badass that forged his path to badassery through conquest, bold courage, and ingenuity. Somerled's early life was gloomy, though. His family was in crisis, along with his family's fortune. His grandfather, Gilledamnan, had been driven from his lands in Argyll by the Norse. Probably King Harald Fairhair sought refuge in County Fermanagh in Ireland with his kindred of Clan Cholla. Somerled's father, Gillebride, had some unsuccessful attempts to remove the Norse invaders from lands in Morvern and Ardgour and Argyll, but the Norse had a stranglehold on the entire west coast of Scotland, from Man all the way to the Orkneys. Now Gillebride and his warriors were forced to hide in caves and woods of Morvern and carry out guerrilla attacks on their enemies in an attempt to drive them from their lands. They did this for so long that they became known as the Gillebride Gillebride of the Cave. Now, they seem to be at their lowest point as a family, sparsing out an existence in the shadows of an invading force. The Norse were poised to drive the pesty islemen out of the Isles and Argyll and completely destroy their chances of ever recovering their former lives. Now, it was at this point that Gillebride's son, Somerled, a bold and courageous person with brilliant strategic and tactical abilities, took control of their destiny and their attempts to regain the family possessions. And he did that, and then some. This badass would become known as Rex Insulareum, King of the Isles. Now, with his father's spirit broken, few supporters, and seemingly entrenched Norse enemy, Somerled has a daunting task before him, and Somerled's family name did not hold the same sway it did at one time. Humiliated by the downfall at the hands of the Norse. Now, during this time, the Norse used their longships to attack the last vestiges of clan rule in the Isles and in Argyll, and in a last-ditch move to secure total domination over western parts of Scotland. But in Somerled's past, he had impressed the chief of Clan McInnes of Morvern. He had distinguished himself in battle and impressed the chief, who would die from his wounds in that very same battle. Somerled had gained the moniker Somerled Mor Mach Gillebride, Somerled the Mighty, son of Gillebride. Now, according to legend, an aged chief who followed the one who passed away of Clan McInnes recommended Somerled as their new leader based on this reputation. So with his known prowess in battle and the chief's approval, it was unanimously decided that he was asked to command. Now, when Somerled took command of the Clan McInnes, he knew that they were outnumbered. But this is the moment when badasses are made, and his brilliant strategy was to make the Norse believe that they had more men than they actually did. Somerled ordered his men to kill a herd of cattle and skin them. Then he ordered this little group to march around a hilltop in view of the Norse who were camped nearby. Now, first they marched by in their own clothes. Then they would circle around unbeknownst to the Norse and circle back across the hilltop dressed in the cowhide, hair side out. Then, circling back around one more time, they marched through with hide skins out. Now this maneuver made their force look 3 times as big as it really was, and as the Norse intelligence knew, which began instilling doubt and fear in the hearts of those posed against Somerled. Now, twice as many campfires were built that night, and twice as many that were needed, and each man took their hides and placed them over near the fires propped up with sticks, so it looked like there was more men there than actually was. And then they had a good meal, partied, and had a good time for the upcoming battle. This made the Norse realize that there was no fear in their hearts, even though they were just putting on an act. Then Somerled attacked the now demoralized Norse warriors, who had lost some of its force to desertion in the night, and its will to fight a larger army. Somerled's forces drove them northwards to the River Shield, where they were hunted down and killed. Some did escape, though, but this may have been a ploy of Somerled's all along. Word of Somerled's leadership, bravery, and cunning in battle had spread like wildfire, and it seems that Somerled had made a name for himself. He had become the focus for the resistance movement against the Norse in the west. His success renewed the spirit of the dispossessed Gaels, who would flock to him from all the lands. Now further successes bred confidence that Somerled was the right leader at the right time to drive the Norse from Scotland. Somerled didn't sit back on his laurels. He pressed his advantage and continued his attack on the Norsemen and their strongholds. He never let up or allowed them to make advances, or alliances, or regroup. Men from all over rallied to his cause, and his numbers grew. This allowed him to drive the Norsemen out of Argyll and back to their bases in the Western Isles and the Hebrides. This was the most badass event to happen because Somerled had successfully challenged the Norse, and now their presence in the Isles was in question. Would he try to drive them out of there too? Who knows? Now many people view Somerled as a great Gallic hero who rose up against his Norse oppressors, when in fact it was more like a Norse civil war. You see, ever since the first landing at Lindisfarne in 794 AD, the Norse had continually returned and eventually stayed within the British Isles, especially the islands along the western coast of Scotland. And then over the next few hundred years, the Scottish clans became increasingly more of a Norse-Gael hybrid. What we know of as Scotland today was really a group of different kingdoms in 1153 AD. Norse, Gallic, Gal-Gael, and remnants of the Cumbrians. All of Scotland had been fighting the Norse for generations, and the last thing they needed was another Norse overlord. And Somerled knew this. This was where his brilliance came in. So Somerled embraced the Gallic culture and that side of his ancestry, and in doing so he brought even more people into his fold. The people who managed his forces, ships, and castles were foremost remnants of his father's Fermanagh and Morvern warriors, but increasingly they came from Ardgour, Lorne, Appin, Knapdale, Kintyre, and of course all parts of Argyll. You see, Somerled wasn't just a ruthless warlord who took lands. He was a ruthless warlord that recaptured his ancestral lands by right. Upon being made chief, he took the rest by might, and right and might make a formidable combination. Somerled concentrated on the Western Isles because the seas were the highways of the time, and their complicated geography he could use to his advantage. If he gained total control of the West, then he could expand his influence and lands to the east. After all, the Scots king, King David I, was too busy Normanizing the south and Northumbria to worry about losing what all Scotland except him thought of as the heart of Scotland, its birth with the kings of Argyll and Dalriada. Now Somerled forged his kingdom with a Norse hammer, and this gained him the moniker Hammer of the Norse, cementing his leadership with the people. Now, I could write a thick-ass novel and still not thoroughly explain the badassery of this great warrior. He did way too much, and his influence can still be seen today. I mean, his sons, Donald Argyll would head some of the largest and most powerful clans in all of Scotland. Now, among them, MacDougals, MacDonalds, the Clan Ranald, and many more. He even innovated the use of a central rudder instead of what had been used up to that point, a steerboard. He did this so that he could have smaller ships built that were more maneuverable and, of course, deadlier. But the story of Somerled that I like best, that perfectly describes his badass ingenuity, is the story where Somerled wanted to marry Ragnhild, daughter of Olaf the Red, the Norse king of Man, whose territory included the Hebrides. However, this warlord was having none of it. What King Olaf wanted from Somerled was not a son-in-law, but assistance in raiding the Isle of Skye, a troublesome little island in the Inner Hebrides. Somerled, being of a bloodthirsty disposition, consented to help, but had ulterior motives. Somerled knew that helping him get control would extend his own influence, but marrying King Olaf's daughter would give him influence and grow his lands and put him in a position to control all of the Western Isles and Argyll. Now, one of Somerled's kinsmen helped him hatch a plan under cover of darkness. This man of his crept into Olaf's camp and drilled holes in Olaf's personal ship right at the waterline, which he then plugged with tallow, which is beef fat. The next day, when they were off to raid Skye, Olaf's boat started to spring leaks, when all of the tallow got washed away. He cried out to Somerled for help, but his words fell on deaf ears. Somerled sailed just close enough, but would not help until Olaf consented to Somerled's proposal of marriage to his daughter Ragnhild. What could he do? So he gave consent. Then Somerled had his man jump on board to plug the holes with perfectly made plugs, almost like they were made to be there. Now Somerled was so happy with how the plot turned out that he rewarded him with lands, and this was the start of the land of MacIntyres that are still there to this day. Now Somerled, he was slain in 1164 at the Battle of Renfrew, amidst an invasion of mainland Scotland, commanding forces drawn from all over his kingdom. The reasons for this attack may have been to nullify Scottish encroachment, but the scale of his venture suggests that he had greater ambitions. He commanded a large force, and victory should have been easily won. However, Somerled fell early in the battle, and his forces were shattered by the loss of their leader. They did not recover, and they lost the battle. In the wake of Somerled's demise, his once vast sea kingdom fragmented as various would-be successors vied for dominance. Now, his legacy lived on with the lordship of the Isles, a power base that his clans would use to dominate for centuries to come.